137 meters long, 23 meters wide, 3 full decks. The Bible provides the exact measurements, but it doesn't explain how to build it. It doesn't say how to cut down trees as tall as buildings, how to move logs weighing tons without cranes, how to fit the wood together without iron nails, or how to seal a massive structure so that not a single drop of water could get in. Noah received the command, but he had to figure out on his own how to turn it into reality. For decades, he and his sons woke up every day facing the same challenge: to build the largest vessel the world had ever seen. No manual, no experience, no one to teach them. And every day, their neighbors would walk by and laugh. How do you build something impossible when all you have is faith and an axe? Where do you build a giant ship when there's no sea nearby? The question sounds absurd, but Noah had no choice. God commanded, "Build an ark." He didn't say where. He didn't explain how to choose the location. He only gave the measurements and said, "Do it." So Noah probably looked around and thought, like any builder would, "I need space, a lot of space," because 137 meters is longer than a football field, and 23 meters wide means you can't build it just anywhere. So the first task wasn't cutting wood, it was finding and preparing the right place. A flat, solid piece of land, large enough, far from slopes that could collapse, near a forest, because hauling heavy timber from far away would be impossible, and close to water for drinking, but not so close that flooding would disrupt the work. And after choosing the site came the brutal labor no one talks about: leveling, removing stones, paring out roots, compacting the soil so it wouldn't sink under the structure's weight. No excavators, no trucks, just shovels, pickaxes, brute strength, and time. But there's another detail: rain. When it rains on a poorly planned construction site, it turns into a swamp. The tools sink, wood rots, work stops. So Noah probably had to create drainage channels around the area, directing the water outward, small trenches strategically dug so that the construction site would stay dry even during storms. And while Noah sweated, digging, leveling, preparing, his neighbors passed by. Some laughed, others shook their heads. A man preparing a huge piece of land to build a ship far from any river or ocean. Madness. It could only be madness. But here's what they didn't understand. Noah wasn't building for the world that existed. He was building for the world that was about to disappear underwater. Weeks, maybe months later, the ground was ready, flat, solid, drained. But now came the challenge that would make everything else seem small: getting enough wood to build something the size of a 4-story palace. How many trees do you have to cut down to build something the size of a modern ship? Mature cypress trees take decades, sometimes centuries to grow. They are tall trees with thick, heavy trunks. A single one of them can weigh several tons, and to build a 137-meter structure, hundreds of trees, maybe thousands, would be needed. But chopping down a giant tree with a bronze axe isn't like cutting firewood. Bronze dulls quickly. You strike, strike, strike in the same spot. Splinters of wood fly, arms ache, hands bleed, and after hours, the cut hasn't even gone halfway through the trunk. So 2 men worked together, one on each side, taking turns with their blows to keep the rhythm. And when the trunk finally began to give way, the most dangerous moment arrived. Where would it fall? A 20-meter tree falling in the wrong direction could kill anyone nearby, could crash into other trees and get stuck, or could split upon hitting the ground and become useless. So Noah and his sons probably cut strategic wedges to guide the fall. They tied ropes to the top to pull it in the right direction. And when the tree finally crashed down with a thunderous echo through the forest, the work had only just begun, because now they had to move that massive log to the construction site. How do you move something the size of a bus without wheels, without tractors, without cranes? Mature cypress log easily weighs several tons, lying on the forest floor, immovable, defying any attempt to shift it. The most likely solution was the same one used by the Egyptians, Mesopotamians, and other ancient civilizations: wooden rollers. They would cut smaller, thinner logs, place several beneath the large one, then tie ropes to the front and start pulling. As the log rolled forward on the cylinders, They would take the rollers left behind and reposition them in front. It was slow, brutally exhausting, but it worked. Yet here's the detail that complicated everything. Uneven terrain. Rolling logs on a flat surface is already difficult. On slopes, valleys, or rocky ground, it's dangerous. Too much momentum on the downhill roll turns the log into a deadly weapon. It could crush those guiding it, smash into rocks and crack, or tumble into ravines and be lost entirely. So before moving any log, Noah probably had to prepare the paths, level the ground, remove large stones, and create wide trails. Weeks of extra labor just to transport the wood safely. And then there was another problem: strength. Even with rollers, it takes many men pulling ropes in unison. Noah had 3 sons, 4 men in total. Could they manage it alone? Unlikely. It's possible they hired local workers, people who needed the pay and didn't care about the strange reasons behind the project. Each log that reached the site represented days of effort, aching muscles, ropes snapping at the worst moments, accidents, sometimes fatal. And while some planks dried, stacked with spacing for air circulation, Noah kept cutting more trees. A never-ending cycle of labor, but soon would come the stage that would truly test his skill as a builder, erecting the structure without it collapsing or sinking. How do you raise a 3-story structure without it falling apart before it's even finished? The answer begins with something most people never think about: the keel. The central main beam that acts as the backbone of any vessel. Without it, you just have a pile of planks that can't hold together. But here's the challenge. The keel of the ark had to be 137 meters long. No tree on earth grows that big, so Noah had to join several massive beams, one fitting into the next, creating a continuous line. Each joint had to be perfect, male and female notches, locked with hardwood pegs, because if the keel cracked or broke, the entire ark would break with it. And after the keel came the ribs, curved beams rising from the sides, giving shape to the hull. But how do you bend wood without breaking it? With steam and heat, you slowly warm the wood, making it flexible. Then you bend it gradually, fixing it into the desired shape until it cools and hardens again. A slow, delicate process. One cracked rib meant weeks of lost work. Now think about the scale. Dozens of giant ribs had to be fitted into the keel, evenly spaced, all at the exact angle. A mistake of just a few degrees, and the structure would become crooked, unbalanced, unstable. So Noah probably used taut ropes as guides, precise markings, and stone plumb lines to check verticality. Even then, adjusting a multi-ton beam into a perfect joint required coordinated brute strength, primitive pulleys, levers, and men pulling ropes in unison. And there's another critical detail: diagonal reinforcements, crossbeams forming triangles. Why? Because triangles are the most stable geometric shape there is, impossible to deform without breaking. So the ark's internal framework was a complex network of interwoven wood, distributing weight and resisting pressure. When the skeleton of the ark finally stood tall, Noah looked at that giant structure and understood. Now came the part that would decide whether it would float or sink, sealing every gap, every joint, every microscopic crack, because a single failure could have killed everyone inside. Bitumen, plant resin, boiled into a sticky, toxic, scorching paste. The Bible is specific: you shall cover it inside and out with pitch. That double instruction saved everything, because bitumen on the outside alone wouldn't suffice. Water finds its way in, seeping from below, rotting the wood from the inside out, so every inch had to be sealed on both sides. But here's the part few imagine: applying bitumen inside the ark, enclosed, dark spaces with little ventilation. The toxic fumes would concentrate, making the air almost unbreathable. Working in there meant frequently stepping outside to breathe fresh air, then returning, applying again, stepping out once more. Hours of interrupted labor, burns on the hands, irritated skin, and it wasn't just one layer, multiple layers, waiting for it to dry, applying another, checking for cracks, reapplying where necessary. A process that took weeks, maybe months. But the true test of the bitumen would only come once the ark was in the water. Until then, it was impossible to know if any joint had failed, if some microscopic crack allowed leaks. So every application was as much an act of faith as of craftsmanship. When the final coat of bitumen finally dried, the ark was sealed. Now came the challenge of dividing the vast interior into organized compartments, because thousands of animals would have to live inside for more than a year, and without organization, total chaos. How do you organize the interior of a massive structure to house thousands of animals for over a year? The Bible gives a clue: 3 decks, and it mentions compartments. In Hebrew, kanim, literally meaning nests or cells, small separated spaces. But why? Because without divisions, you'd have chaos, animals fighting, predators attacking prey, diseases spreading rapidly. So every species needed its own space, walls between them, safety. But here came the engineering challenge: building internal walls without compromising the structure. Every wall adds weight, changes the load distribution, so the most logical approach would be to place the heaviest animals on the lowest deck. Elephants, rhinoceroses, hippos. A low center of gravity prevents the ark from capsizing. Medium-sized animals on the second deck, lions, bears, horses, and the smaller ones, birds and light creatures, on the top deck, a strategic weight distribution to maintain balance. But there's another problem no one thinks about: waste. Thousands of animals producing waste every day. Without a drainage system, the ark would turn into a toxic sewer within weeks. Diseases would kill everyone before the flood even ended. So, most likely, there were sloped channels in the floors, small grooves directing liquids towards specific points. Perhaps openings along the lower sides allowed the waste to flow out once the ark was afloat. Simple but effective. And ventilation, the Bible mentions a single window at the top. But that's not enough to ventilate 3 full decks. There were probably strategic side openings, shielded by overhangs to prevent water from entering, while still allowing air circulation. Without proper ventilation, heat and gases would build up, animals suffocating, everyone dead before the waters receded. And then there's food storage. A year's worth of food for thousands of animals meant tons of hay, grain, dried fruit, dedicated spaces just for storage, organized for easy access, but protected from moisture. When all that interior structure was finally ready, Noah had built something far more complex than a simple ship. But one crucial part was still missing: the door. A massive opening that had to be strong enough to not compromise the entire structure. The elephants, animals of all sizes. So it was a huge opening. And here comes the engineering problem. The bigger the opening, the weaker the wall becomes. It's a structural weak point. A giant door in a wall that must withstand water pressure from all sides. Dangerous. So the position mattered. The Bible mentions that the door was on the side, not in the front or back. That makes sense. The side walls distribute pressure better than the ends, and a side door allows for better balance during the animal's entry. But the door needed heavy reinforcement around it. Extra beams forming a strong frame, thicker wood, tighter joints, all to compensate for the structural weakness of the opening. And there's another interesting detail. The Bible doesn't mention Noah installing bolts or locks. Why? Because it says that God himself closed the door. That means Noah built it, trusting that his role was to create the structure. But the divine closing would come later. Still, the seal around the door had to be perfect. So probably extra layers of bitumen, maybe flexible material around the edges, something like plant fibers soaked in resin, worked as a primitive gasket. When the door closed, those fibers pressed against the wall, sealing it completely. And think about the size of hinges required, or rather, a pivot system, because metal hinges would have been rare and expensive. Probably a reinforced vertical wooden axle that allowed the door to rotate. Heavy, but functional. When the door was finally installed, tested, and sealed, the construction was complete. Decades of work, thousands of hours, mountains of wood transformed into a structure that defied logic. But now came the strangest part of all. Something no builder could plan or control, because suddenly, without anyone guiding them, the animals began to appear on their own. How do you test a giant ship without putting it in water? You don't. You can't. The ark was built on dry land, far from any body of water large enough. So all those decades of work depended on mental calculations, practical experience, and faith that the proportions given by God would work. But Noah could do some final checks, walking through the entire structure, inspecting every joint, looking for cracks that appeared as the bitumen dried, testing the strength of the beams, pushing on walls to feel if they were solid or if something gave way. He probably began loading supplies gradually, bags of grain, bales of hay, jars of water, observing how the structure responded to the added weight, listening, because wood, under pressure, makes sounds. It creaks, groans, snaps, and if something had gone wrong, Noah would have heard it. But the real surprise came when the animals began to appear. The Bible says they came to Noah 2 by 2. They weren't hunted, they weren't dragged, they came on their own. Imagine the scene. Animals migrating spontaneously from every direction, predators walking peacefully beside their prey, birds flying and landing near the entrance, reptiles crawling, all converging on the same place as if guided by an invisible force. And here's the detail that completes everything. Every animal went straight to its compartment. No confusion, no fights, as if they knew exactly where they were supposed to be. This was no longer a human project. It was something beyond Noah's ability to control or explain. When the last animal entered, Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives went in too. 8 people in total. But then it happened just as it was written. God closed the door. The construction was complete. But now the true test began. How Noah and his family survived inside the ark through all those days of the flood. Click here to see how Noah survived inside the ark during the flood.